Hello everyone, my name is Cadence Rolfson. I'm a member of the CASA Youth Council. It's a council that is dedicated to destigmatizing, raising awareness of, and advocating for mental health. And this is The Body's Battle, a lived experience perspective of eating disorders. So just a general trigger warning, I do talk about eating disorders, purging, and a little bit about emotional abuse. It's nothing too crazy though, so there's not too much to worry about, but just be aware. So, my story with disordered eating didn't begin in a way you often hear about on social media. My story didn't begin with a traumatic event or a desperate need for control or a humiliating event centered on my body. I do understand that this can happen to a lot of people, but it's not what happened to me. My story with disordered eating grew gradually and it snuck up on me until I was too scared to function healthily and kind of turn back time. My disordered eating also progressed as I developed more and more healthy eating behaviors and purging behaviors, and then a really, really messed up concept of body image. But by the time I discovered what I was dealing with was in fact an eating disorder, even though I knew about eating disorders, I had already been suffering from them for the greater part of a decade. So let's just begin with why eating disorders, which are specific psychological disorders based around unhealthy eating behaviors and body image concepts. And why it is serious. So, according to Stats Canada in 2016, about 1 million Canadians met the criteria for an eating disorder. So, 1% of our population has anorexia, and around 3% have bulimia. And this is even larger for binge eating disorder, which isn't as commonly known about because a lot of us are like, oh, I binge eat sometimes, but it's not quite the same. So, around 30 to 40% of those trying to lose weight on a program have binge eating disorder. And in our general population, 3.5% of women, 2% of men, and 1.5% of teens have binge eating disorder. And on top of this, eating disorders have the highest mortality rate out of any mental illness, and it's between 10 to 15%. That's serious, and this is a treatable mental illness. Cardiac arrest is the first major mortality for anorexia, and this is followed by suicide. And then in bulimia, around 25 to 30% of people suffering will attempt suicide at some point. And even more serious is that more and more people, especially young people, are engaging in dieting behavior, which really significantly increases your chance of getting an eating disorder. So, just generally speaking, the common risk factors include genetics and your family history, a history of dieting and body image dissatisfaction, anxiety, and other mental health problems, because a lot of the time it is comorbid. There's behavioral inflexibility. This is when you have a hard time breaking rules. Like you're very rigid on how things are done and how you do them. And then there's also other things like weight stigma, bullying and teasing. There's trauma, acculturation, limited social networks, and also idealization internalization, which is where you base your self-worth based on how you look and if you fit an ideal that you have in mind. So although the beginnings of my disordered eating problem began in a way you don't really hear about, I had a lot of the characteristics of people who survive eating disorders. So from my early childhood, I was a chronic perfectionist, it was crazy, and I was really extremely competitive. I was obsessed with rules and following them to a point that a little minor mishap that's not really a big deal would just blow into a whole emotional breakdown. So, for example, in the second grade, I walked backwards up a staircase because I was horsing around with my friends. Totally normal, right? And accidentally set off a school-wide backwards day, and the older grade teachers were very upset, and they came to our classroom trying to figure out who did it. And I refused to say that it was me. And this live omission bothered me for weeks. Like, nobody cared about it anymore. Probably nobody even remembers that. But it buried itself inside me, and at one point a few weeks later, it's like 3 a.m., and I wake my parents up sobbing and telling them how bad of a person I am because I didn't admit to something that honestly wasn't even a big deal. And this isn't the only case. There's another time when one of my favorite songs had a swear in it, and I didn't even say the swear. I wasn't even singing the song, but the lyric passed through my head, and that swear was in there, right? Because I'd heard it before. And I thought I was such a bad person, and I ran to my parents and gave them a whole lecture on why I should be grounded. Like, it was a lot. Anyways, later on, I also became very involved in sports, which amounted to overlapping practices in gymnastics, dance, cheer, basketball, volleyball, cross country, track and field. Heck, it was a lot. It got ridiculous, and my body had a really hard time keeping up. And it also resulted in a lot of injury. And this competitiveness just kept it going, just kept my really rigid rules going. And I was also starving, which obviously most teenagers are starving, but I also had to eat a lot to keep up for sports. And another thing typical I had with characteristics to those who suffer from eating disorders is that I was often complimented on my figure because I was involved in a lot of sports. And like I know one thing that really sticks with me was being called beanpole all the time. And people being amazed at what size I fit into. And it really stuck with me, and I was really proud of it because I was a perfectionist, but it really wasn't healthy. But this didn't really begin a problem with body concept until I was in later middle school when puberty hit. And it really scared me. It scares a lot of teenagers. But we have a specific problem in this society with viewing female puberty as negative because you gain fat percentages, you have periods, and you have developing like body parts like your hips and your breasts. And it's often a lot worse for athletes because it really throws off your skills and athletic abilities, especially in a sport like gymnastics, which is based on your center of gravity and your mass, right? But so a lot of us really wanted to go back in time to when things and skills were easier. Also, I really identified like that idealization identification. That was me. I really believe myself in being in impeccable shape, which was essentially a really unhealthy concept of having like zero body fat and, being tiny. It was just unhealthy. And I centered my identity around it. So, for whatever reason, I fixated the idea of being in shape on a particular pant and shirt and bra size, which again is unhealthy because you're gonna grow, right? But this just became dangerous when it was mixed with my perfectionism and my anxiety, and then later in high school, my PTSD. And it's at this age when eating disorders begin. It's often in your adolescence or your young adulthood, like your early 20s. For example, a lot of people begin developing anorexia after puberty. It's a disorder that's caused by restricting your food intake below what is necessary to maintain your weight at a weight that is like the lower side of the healthy scale, which causes them to be extremely low weight, and it's a very dangerous disorder. Although I've never personally had anorexia, I've had a lot of friends who did. So there are two types of anorexia. There's the binge purge type, which is when a person has their restrictions on food, but whenever they go over, they will binge or purge to try and get rid of the extra weight. And then there's also the restrictive type, that's number 2, where people just happen to be highly disciplined and they're just slowly really starving themselves. It's just for some of your information, just so you can look out for others. These symptoms include rapidly losing weight or staying at a very unhealthy weight, obsession with calories and fat contents, ritual eating patterns and behaviors, fixation on food, amenorrhea in females, depression, thinning hair, and growth of lanugo, which is soft hair on like the body or the face, and avoiding social functions or just, trying to remain isolated. But for me, I personally deal with bulimia and binge eating, which we'll get into later. So once I went into grade 9, I got more competitive in gymnastics. I was competing at a higher level, and I basically had to leave the other sports to just focus on gymnastics. It will and always has been the first love of my life. I love gymnastics, but like other elite sports, there's a really unhealthy culture around it. Probably some of you have heard of Larry Nassar, a guy who sexually assaulted, I think it's about 500 females. There's also a lot of emotional abuse and physical abuse in the sport, and a lot of gymnasts come out with either eating disorders or anxiety disorders or depression. So they are now trying to change this culture, but unfortunately for a lot of us, it's too little too late. My first competitive coach was amazing. He was a godsend. I loved him. He let us females wear whatever we wanted as long as it was safe. So you've probably seen the gym suits that gymnasts wear. They're very tight. They don't leave anything for the imagination. They're super uncomfortable, but that's what they make us wear. But our coach understood that it's that letting us wear leggings and shorts and t-shirts wasn't a really big deal as long as it was safe and we didn't panic when the competition came and we had to just wear the leotard. He also always complimented us on how hard we worked and like trying to push through new skills and being a good teammate rather than our results and how we looked, which a lot of coaches do, unfortunately. But then he actually had to move to the other side of the country, and the next year we had different coaches. And honestly, my team made a huge jump in levels because we were all beginners, and that's when the ugly side of gymnastics kind of reared its head. But one of our new coaches particularly left a mark on all of us. Within the next year, a good portion of us would develop some type of disordered eating or body dysmorphia. But it was never something we could talk about openly to each other because in gymnastics you're still competing against your teammates, right? So you had to keep whatever it was inside of you. And what happened was that she transferred all her own negative body image problems onto us. And we constantly hear how we needed to maintain like a prepubescent shape, how we needed to not let our boobs grow beyond a certain point. I think it was like a B cup, which is just like you're gonna grow bigger than that. And how we couldn't let anything grow, especially our butts, or it'll become hysterical looking and it'll be weird. And how a certain girl looks amazing, and why can't you look like that? Or there was another team in the gym, and we'd always feel like being pushed towards looking like them and doing what they were doing so we could look like them, and that would make us better gymnasts. Although we were fine, there were honestly completely different sports between the two. But it was a lot to be impressed on a young girl's mind, and even some of the boys on the team. It was a lot. And additionally, we were even told to work out and condition at home on top of the tons of hours we spent in the gym just to look better, and then we could get a better score because judges also judge like unconsciously they're biased about how you look, not just your skills, which is sad, and they're working on it too. But it was a lot. Like I'd get home and it would be 10 p.m. or 11 p.m. and I was supposed to be going to bed because I had to wake up at 5 or 6 the next morning. And I'd be in my room when I was supposed to be sleeping doing ab exercises or body weight exercises, and it was too much. And I'd also go to the point where I would be like trying to cut out certain foods, but exercising way too much and not eating enough. And then I'd go through school and I'd go through training and I'd feel sick in the middle of my routines and I'd be nauseous and be ready to pass out. And I wasn't the only one. But then I would get in the car on the way home and I have to eat so much food to try and keep up because gymnasts do have to eat a lot to just maintain where they're at. And then I would eat way too much to make up for not eating, and then it would start all over again. Yeah, so anyways, we also learned that the other group in the gym that we were constantly told to look like or be like were on water pills and diet pills by their coaches, and they were 13 to 18. And that's disgusting. Like there's no reason a young athlete like that should be on those types of pills. We'd often like walk into the change rooms and they'd be either throwing up, getting sick, or just not doing well on the pills, and they were very upset about it. But they're like, well, that's the sport. That's what you have to pay to be a good gymnast. And that's not true. It's really not true. But at the time, we thought that was normal and like jealous about it that they got to look like that, even though it was making them sick. Eventually, like, I graduated high school. I took a gap year from gymnastics so I could go through my first year of university because I knew it was going to be hard for me. And everyone has heard of the freshman 15, but a lot of people haven't thought about it from an athlete's perspective because not only are you gaining another 15 pounds, but a lot of elite athletes go through what we call a second puberty. Basically, when you go through your first round of puberty, you, as an athlete, some things get repressed, right? You don't gain as much weight as your other friends. You don't you don't go through as much development. So when you finally stop sport, your body's like, okay, this is my chance. And it just goes into overdrive with weight gain and development. And so, because it thinks it's putting away fat for when you go back to the sport, right? It doesn't know that you're not going back. So you gain even more weight, your body changes, and it's a lot in a short amount of time. And it causes a lot of eating disorders just from that. And for me, I don't know how much weight I gained because I refused to weigh myself, but it was definitely more than 15. It was definitely more than 15 pounds, I'll say that. And on top of that, I had a lot of injuries from gymnastics. There's a whole other issue, but I couldn't properly get exercise because I needed to rest because I had so many bones that either had stress fractures or weren't healing properly, so I had to take like a full year off everything. And then also, on top of that, nobody warns you about, oh, you had to take over 2,000 calories just to maintain your weight. Well, now you're not doing sports and you're not doing any exercise, so you need to drop calories, right? You don't think like that. And also your body doesn't think like that. It thinks you still need those calories. So you are getting constant urges to just eat, right? And I didn't know about it, and nobody warned me about it. And honestly, that's how my bulimia and binge eating really started. I already had the negative body concept, but just not exercising and then gaining weight and then, feeling bad about myself and then thinking I need extra calories and then try to cut the calories. That's how it started. So throughout high school and gymnastics, I did have periods of purging. So purging is compensatory behaviors to counteract weight gain. So it's vomiting or working out excessively or taking laxatives, things like that. But for me, this often looked like extra workouts and runs after gym, which I was told to do, but it was unhealthy, just to try to rid myself of gaining even more weight. At times, I did make myself throw up, but that didn't last very long because I knew the negative effects of making yourself throw up. There's a lot of physiological damage that can happen, so I really didn't want to end up like that. But also during university, I began having body dysmorphia. So remember all those negative body concepts I was taught? Well, that's what it became. So body dysmorphia is when you see a distorted version of yourself when you look at yourself, be it the mirror or just looking down at your body or on camera, and it's different than what's actually there. So often it's a fixation on a invisible flaw you think you have, but nobody else sees, but you're convinced it's there and it's glaringly obvious, or it is a flaw you do have, but most people don't pay attention to it and don't notice it, but you fixate out on it. So I heard a example of it. It's like, when you're a teenager and you have like a pimple on your face, right? And you keep checking the mirror to see how it looks, and every time you look, it looks bigger and bigger. And it's all you can focus on, and you're concerned everyone's gonna be staring at you about it, but then nobody even notices. That's what it's like, but constantly every day. So for me, this focused around my weight gain. When I looked in the mirror, I saw someone who was honestly about 300 pounds. Like I thought I looked like an elephant or a rhinoceros. It was messed up because I wasn't that heavy. And it sounds comedic, but it's true. That's what happened to me. I avoided the mirrors. I avoided taking pictures like the plague. Like I have no pictures from really important moments of my life because I was terrified of pictures because then I would see myself, right? And it made sense, but it doesn't actually make sense. But funnily enough, at the same time as my body dysmorphia, I had a completely other thing going on. I was also in denial about my weight gain because I was so focused on I have to look a certain way to be worth something that I just wanted to push off the feelings of thinking I was inadequate. And I would just tell myself I was really bloated or I just gained a couple pounds and I can work it off in a week, but obviously that wasn't true. And to top it off, I refused to step on the scale because I was scared of it and I thought it would make it worse. And I wouldn't measure myself, which just led to having no healthy benchmarks. So, also just a refresher, bulimia is recurrent episodes of binge eating followed by inappropriate compensatory behaviors like purging. And binge eating is where a large amount of food is consumed in a really short amount of time. And it's not just like, oh, I really want those cookies today. It's like It's like a ravenous, never-ending hunger where you just eat everything. You lose control. You eat past when you're full or stuffed. Like you just keep going. And you eat when you're not hungry, and then afterwards you feel guilty and depressed and just disgusted with yourself. So, anyways, moving on back to my story. Later in university, I joined CrossFit because I knew I needed a sport to get into. It's also known as functional fitness now a lot, but it was me trying to grasp onto a healthy lifestyle, and I also knew that a lot of the workouts were extreme, and I thought this would help me. But unfortunately, what happened was with me doing those extreme workouts and then still doing running and still doing some gymnastics, it led to more injuries and it caused more unhealthy eating because I was stressed and my weight fluctuated up and down more than it ever has in my whole life. It it led to me feeling inadequate and then hiding from friends at the gym because I was embarrassed. Like every time I fluctuated when I went down, I was so happy with myself and I was so proud and I was elated. But then when I did gain because I wasn't eating enough, I wouldn't go to the gym for weeks and I avoided everyone because I was embarrassed. But also every time I tried to ask for help, I it kind of just got brushed aside. So then I didn't get the help I needed. So I felt hopeless and I felt, well, this is the only way. If I just do it next time, we'll be okay and I'll make it and I'll lose weight for once. But obviously that never happened. And this, I just felt like I was casting the role of like the overweight, fit kid who just really eats bad, but if they could just get their life together, they could do it. And I just felt like I had this cast through my entire life. Like in high school, I was just the one who was obsessed with fitness and eating healthy, and then I felt like in university and even just now, my friends are just like, "Oh, haha, like just you're making another joke about starting your diet tomorrow. Like we all know you're not gonna lose weight. Haha, you're so funny." But nobody really realized the dangerous thing I was doing to my body. Like, it should have been a red flag, which is why I'm hoping this video can help other people realize what's going on around them. And this all just came to a peak when I got married, because again, getting married leads to weight gain for some people, right? Don't know why, it just does. But for once, well, my husband was working long hours and I was in school. I could mess up and binge eat as much as I liked. Nobody was gonna see it. No one was gonna say anything to me, and I did it a lot because I just was obsessed with how terrible I looked to the point where I would put myself on a diet of less than 800 calories a day, and then when I inevitably got sick, then I would binge eat. And then I'd feel disgusted with myself for binge eating. And then I'd make a new plan of exercising too much and eating too less, and then I'd get sick again. And it just went over and over and over again. And then on top of that, with my PTSD and anxiety I dealt with, it made me want to eat even more. Because I know this is true for some people with eating disorders or other comorbid mental illnesses make it worse, right? Because eating makes you feel good. That's what it is for humans. So, and then I later saw a psychologist at the university as well for my PTSD and unrelated trauma. But every time I filled out the evaluation questionnaire we get, I would always circle like the eating disorder problems, but he would never talk to me about it. And this was something I was so embarrassed with. I can talk about all the other mental health things I've gone through so easy, but for whatever reason, the eating disorder things I was so embarrassed with, this is actually the first time I'm talking about it. But he would never say anything to me, and I knew he was looking at them because he'd mentioned other things I put, but never that one. And I think the problem is a lot of psychologists think, oh, if you just solve the trauma, the eating disorder will go away. The eating disorder is just a manifestation of trauma, but for some like me, it's not. It's just it's its own problem, and honestly, a lot of my mental health, like anxiety problems, would have gone away if I had solved my eating problems. And so I just kept making these unending plans in new notebooks and writing new crazy plans. Like, I'm gonna work out 4 hours a day and I'm gonna only eat 800 calories. And I would make these extravagant plans and then I would fail them. And then I get a new notebook and write it all over again. And I kept these really crazy motivation pictures on my phone. You see them on Tumblr or Instagram or Pinterest, and I would say and be like, nope, that's what you have to look like if you're going to be anything good. Like, you have to get there before you do anything good with your life. And I thought that was normal. I thought it was just like, I thought everyone does that for motivation to get healthy. And I thought those what do you call them, edits on pictures about saying this isn't healthy, don't do this, were just stupid people who didn't understand, but really they were right. It was bad. And I didn't know it was normal. And sometimes I still think it is normal, and then I have to remind myself, no, not everyone is obsessed with like their body shape like you are. Like this isn't normal. This shouldn't be your every waking thought. But it came to the point where I ended up in the doctor's office just over a year ago. What was happening is I was getting crazy amounts of heartburn, severe reflux. I was vomiting in the middle of the night. I was having stomach aches, constipation, any gastrointestinal issue you can think of, I had it. We found out it was partly my genetics and family history because a lot of people in my family have some type of eating problem. And it was also just the unhealthy cycle I was putting myself through. It was ruining my insides. And that exact day, I had to quit gluten, processed foods, milk, and red meat for a short amount of time. And this really kickstarted an extreme version of what I was going through. And I don't know how the doctor missed this, but that's what happened. She told me I needed to lose weight, even though I was clearly showing symptoms of an eating disorder. And so then it just got even crazy. I got back to that obsessed with being less than 800 calories, and then I couldn't eat any of the food that I normally ate, right? I didn't know how to cook without gluten and milk, and it was a lot to learn, and so I ended up honestly starving for a few months, and then I would obviously have to binge eat because my body was freaking out at me saying, "What are you doing? You're gonna die." But so I would binge eat, but this time I had a kicker because every time I binge eat and ate any of those foods, I would become extremely ill, and it would just go all over again. I was sick for weeks. It was a really hard time, and but the other problem was I lost a lot of weight very fast, and the unhealthy part was I was so excited and obsessed with this, and I wanted to keep going. And that caused pills that I got from the pharmacist to, help my body get rid of a lot of things that were making it sick. I ended up overtaking them for months because I loved how it just got rid of all the calories I ate, right? And this just kept me more physically sick and it prolonged it. And I just took them for months and it didn't help me learn. I still wouldn't eat enough even though I was on these pills and still restricting myself to that arbitrary 800 calorie number. And then I would exercise too much and then make myself sick because I wasn't eating any food. And then I would binge eat and then I would get sick from the huge amount of food I ate, which contained a lot of things I can't eat. And they would just start over and over and over again. And it got to the point where I think it was January, February, I was done. I was done giving my life to this disordered eating, and I was tired of looking in the mirror and being disgusted, so I was like, okay, that's it, something needs to change. I gotta do this the healthy way. So I went back to the gym with everybody, and I was trying to make healthy life choices, and within, I think it was the third day back at the gym, I tore my ACL. So, for those of you who don't know, an ACL tear is devastating. You can't walk properly. You usually need surgery, and your leg really won't ever be the same again. And I was so frustrated. I had no clue what to do because I was so sure this was going to be the time it changed. And so I didn't know what to do, and I gained even more weight. And so by March, I decided I need to figure out another way around it because clearly my leg wasn't going to cooperate with my crazy plans. So I watched a video on a YouTube channel dedicated to this lady who has gone through, I think, binge eating, and she was talking about the way she did, and she said the first thing you need to do is face your fear, get on the scale, and figure out how heavy you are. So I did it, and I decided to weigh myself. I weighed in at 190 pounds. I was devastated. Like, I know I'm laughing, but it was one of the worst moments in my life. I was so sure that was it. I was 50 pounds over where I should be and 60 to 70 pounds from where I was as a gymnast. And I know it could have been worse. I could have weighed a lot more. I understand that. But for someone who has an eating disorder and came from a very competitive athletic world, it felt so crushing to me. And I was pretty sure it could only get better from there. So I began running and healthily and doing body weight workouts to repair my injured leg at the same time as working out. And I was surprised at how unhealthy I became. I used to be able to run almost 20 kilometers, no problem, and I could barely run a kilometer. Now that was a mix of my leg and being out of shape, but it was still shocking. But unfortunately, as good as my workout behaviors became, I was still doing an excessive amount, like 3 to 4 hours a day, sweating so much and not eating that I made myself sick, and then I was binge eating at night, so I wasn't losing any weight. So then I knew I had to change, and I ended up watching more videos and YouTube channels, and for whatever reason, at the end of May, there was 3 videos in a row of people who dealt with binge eating bulimia. And all 3 of them were talking about this book that just changed their lives. And so I thought it couldn't be a coincidence. So I got this book. It's Brain Over Binge by Catherine Hansen. She is someone who has gone through anorexia, bulimia, and binge eating disorder. And for her, therapy wasn't working. Trying these elaborate plans wasn't working. So she needed to find a new way. And so I checked the reviews, and they were phenomenal. So I ordered it. It popped up like 2 days later, and I read most of it that same day. And just like the others, it changed my life instantly. So the book begins with the author's history of eating disorders. So she talks about how she was a very elite athlete, and she started dieting, and then it just led to all these disorders for her. And the general premise of the book in retelling her recovery is that urges to binge eat, which is seen in both bulimia, anorexia, and binge eating, mostly binge eating bulimia, it's just something that should be seen as neurological junk. So she goes into greater detail about how most eating disorders start with a simple diet, right? And then restricting your caloric intake causes your body to have a deficit, right? And your older brain, which is your brain beneath your neocortex, is just evolved to keeping you alive, right? And so it sees this deficit and it says, "Oh, we need more food. Okay, we need to do something about this." So it sends these really ravenous, unstoppable urges to eat, right? Until you eat. And then when you do, it gives you a bunch of dopamine because it begins to get you addicted to it. So you will keep eating, right? And this is where it happens. And then you are disgusted with yourself after you binge eat, which is just this unstoppable force to eat. And you feel guilty and upset about it, and you're disgusted with yourself, and you make more goals, but then to counteract it, you end up purging, right? And so whether that's vomiting, using laxatives, or over exercising like I did a lot, that's what it does in order to make it so your more rational brain, so your actual neocortex, is trying to make up for what you did, right? It's a rational response to an irrational situation. And then the cycle begins again because you started all these new goals to counteract what you just did, but it leads to more restriction, so your body freaks out, and it just becomes this vicious cycle until even though you're overweight, your lower brain is just telling you to eat more. And that's completely what happened to me. That's what happens to a lot of people. But it's at this point she tells the readers to view it as neurological junk, right? Your brain doesn't understand what's actually going on. It just sees that you're not eating, right? So she tells you to just observe and understand when you have an urge to eat, but like not just eat, like overeat, like binge eat. And she just tells it to consciously observe it as neurological junk, and that you don't need to follow it. And she also goes further by taking off the restrictions you put on yourself for certain foods, like, I don't know, an arbitrary rule like don't ever eat Oreos, right? Because the second you tell yourself not to eat Oreos, that's all you're going to think of. It's like the pink elephant thing. Don't think of pink elephant. That's what you're going to think of, right? So don't eat Oreos. That's all you're going to think of is eating Oreos. And as soon as you take those restrictions off, you know what? You don't really think about it anymore. It's like, okay, I can have an Oreo if I feel like it, but then you don't have to be worried about yourself completely obliterating the whole pack of Oreos. And honestly, everything's okay in proportions, and you do need to eat, right? And just as a culture, we're obsessed with food and restricting it. Like every season, you see a new in diet that comes along. Like there's Atkins, there's intermittent fasting, there's keto diet, there's rules like don't eat this, eat that, and follow this smoothie recipe or listen to this celebrity. And honestly, recently I saw a post about um, why you shouldn't eat apples because they're super unhealthy for you, right? Like, when did we become scared of eating fruit? Like, that doesn't make sense to me. Why are we keeping ourselves from something healthy? And that's why a lot of eating disorder survivors also do something called intentional eating or mindful eating. And it means listening to your body about what it needs in order to be healthy and just making general healthy choices, not going so crazy. Because that just leads to more restrictions, and then your body gets overwhelmed with all these rules, and then that's what leads to another binge and purge cycle. Of course, there's also other therapies for eating disorders. Catherine Hansen specifically says in her book that her experience and a lot of her people who've read her books experiences are people who have eating disorders not related to trauma like me, right? She says it does work for people who have had trauma with eating disorders, but they also need professional help. So these other professional helps are things like CBT, DBT, there's medical nutrition therapy, just general psychotherapy. They also use medication for eating disorders. Most commonly it's SSRIs and antidepressant, like Prozac, but it's not entirely effective. But for me, what worked was this book. Like, I haven't gotten down to this healthy size, but what I realized is, hey, your self-worth doesn't depend on what size you are. You will get there and you'll be happy, but you can also be happy now. Like, you shouldn't miss your whole life just because you think you're not in ideal shape, right? Like, I shouldn't not go on these trips because I think I'm too fat for them, or I shouldn't take pictures of these really important events because I think I'll be too fat in them, right? You just need to enjoy your life. And it's hard and you think it's not going to work, but once you get yourself on that healthy track, your body connects to it very fast. But what I would say is for anyone suffering with an eating disorder or someone who knows someone with the eating disorder, you need to talk to somebody, you need to get it off your chest. Honestly, telling someone about it was the best step I could have possibly made towards recovery. And I would do it again in a heartbeat. And yes, it is hard knowing that, oh, I can't drop weight in a single day and, you know, overcoming those years of bad habits, because that's what it is. But at the end of the day, I think, okay, I'm gonna get to a healthy way in a healthy way and be able to maintain it. And I don't have to worry about all this like yelling that's going on in my head about being fat when I'm not, right? So obviously, like I said, I do have weight to lose, but the important thing is I'm doing it the healthy way and I'm doing it for me, not to shut up some voice in my head that's saying I'm not enough, because I am, and you guys are enough too. And what I can say is you guys do deserve to have a great life. So it is more than counting calories and pinching yourself and, stepping on a scale and creating crazy plans. You deserve to be healthy and you deserve to be happy. Anyways, I hope my story can help anybody out there. Feel free to reach out to me through the link if you have any questions, and I hope you guys will be happy and healthy. Bye.